July 7th, 1944, Saipan. Captain Ben Salomon crouches behind a smoking machine gun. His hands are slick with blood, some of it his own. The barrel glows red-hot in the pre-dawn darkness. 3,000 Japanese soldiers are screaming toward his position. Behind him, wounded American boys, kids who should be at drive-in movies back home, are crawling, limping, dragging themselves to safety. Every second he holds this line is another second they have to live. He's been shot. Twice. Maybe 3 times. The Geneva Convention says he shouldn't even be here. He's a medic, protected, non-combatant. But the enemy bayoneting his patients in their hospital beds didn't seem to care much about conventions. So Ben Salomon made a choice that would cost him everything, but save everyone. This is the story of the dentist from Milwaukee who wasn't supposed to fight, who was trained to heal, not kill, who wore the red cross that marked him as neutral. But when hell itself came charging through that hospital tent at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, he became something else entirely. For 58 years, almost nobody knew Ben Salomon's name. His Medal of Honor recommendation was filed away, rejected, stamped with bureaucratic red tape, and forgotten in some dusty Pentagon filing cabinet. The official reason? Medical officers can't receive combat medals, against the rules of war. But here's what makes this story so extraordinary and so tragically forgotten. When American forces finally recaptured Ben Salomon's position 3 days after the attack, they found his body still gripping that machine gun. And surrounding him, in a grotesque circle of death, lay the bodies of 98 enemy soldiers. 98. Not a typo, not an exaggeration. 98 confirmed kills from a man who took an oath to save lives, not take them. His body bore 76 gunshot and bayonet wounds. At least 24 of those wounds were inflicted while he was still alive, still fighting, still buying time for men who would have died without him. This isn't Hacksaw Ridge. This isn't Hollywood heroism polished for the silver screen. This is rawer, darker, more impossibly real. And it happened during one of the most brutal battles in Pacific theater history, the Battle of Saipan, where over 3,000 American soldiers would die in just 25 days of fighting. But before we get to that terrible morning in July 1944, you need to understand who Ben Salomon was. Because heroes aren't born. They're ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when the moment demands it. Benjamin Lewis Salomon was born September 1st, 1914, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to a working-class Jewish immigrant family. From the beginning, Ben was what you'd call a good kid. Not the troublemaker, not the risk-taker. He was the Boy Scout who actually believed in the code. The kid who earned every merit badge, who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, who made Eagle Scout before he turned 18, the highest achievement in American scouting. Only 9 Eagle Scouts in American history have received the Medal of Honor. Ben would become one of them. But in 1930s Milwaukee, Ben Salomon wasn't dreaming of war. He was dreaming of dentistry. After high school at Shorewood High, he attended Marquette University for a year, before transferring west to the University of Southern California. In 1937, at just 23 years old, he graduated from USC Dental School and opened his own practice. Picture him, young, ambitious, friendly, The kind of dentist who'd tell jokes to calm nervous patients, who'd worked late to fit in a kid with a toothache whose family couldn't pay. By all accounts, he was good at it, successful, building a life. That life lasted exactly 3 years. In 1940, the Selective Service Act went into effect. America wasn't in the war yet, but the draft had begun. Ben Salamon's name came up. Here's the thing most people don't know. Ben could have stayed out. As a licensed dentist, he could have secured a deferment. Medical professionals were valuable on the home front. Nobody would have blamed him. He didn't try. When Ben Salamon reported for duty in the fall of 1940, he enlisted as a private in the 102nd Infantry Regiment. Not as a dentist, as a regular infantryman. He wanted to serve the same way any other American boy would, and he was exceptional at it. Within months, he'd been promoted to sergeant. He qualified as expert marksman with both rifle and pistol, the highest shooting classification in the Army. They put him in charge of a machine gun section. His commanding officer would later write that Ben was the best all-around soldier in the entire regiment. Think about that. A dentist from Milwaukee who'd spent his adult life looking at teeth and mixing fillings had become one of the finest combat soldiers in his unit. But in 1942, the Army discovered he was a licensed dentist. They needed dental officers. In wartime, you serve where you're needed most. Ben was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Dental Corps and shipped to Hawaii. For the next 2 years, Captain Ben Salomon treated cavities and pulled wisdom teeth at military hospitals far from the front lines. He was good at it. Professional. But by early 1944, as Allied forces prepared to invade the Mariana Islands, Ben requested reassignment. He wanted to be with the combat troops. In May 1943, he got his wish. He was assigned as the regimental dental officer for the 105th Infantry Regiment, 27th Infantry Division, destined for one of the bloodiest campaigns in the Pacific. But he still wasn't satisfied. Being a regimental dentist meant staying behind the lines. Safe. Comfortable. That's not what Ben Salomon came to war for. And on June 15, 1944, when the 105th Infantry stormed the beaches of Saipan, Ben Salomon was with them. Chapter 1. Hell Island. Saipan was never meant to be easy. The island, a volcanic rock outcrop in the Mariana Islands chain, was just 13 miles long and 5 miles wide. But it was strategically priceless. Capture Saipan and American B-29 bombers could reach Tokyo. Lose Saipan and Japan's defensive perimeter collapses. The Japanese knew it. They'd fortified every cave, every ridge, every inch of high ground with machine gun nests and artillery bunkers. Over 30,000 Japanese troops waited, ordered to fight to the death. When the Marines and Army hit the beaches on June 15th, the killing started immediately. Artillery rained down. Mortar shells screamed in. Machine gun fire turned the surf red. For Captain Ben Salomon, landing with the 105th Infantry, it was his first taste of real combat. The noise was overwhelming, a wall of sound that made thought nearly impossible. The smell of cordite and burning flesh. The screams. But combat operations don't need many dentists. With bullets flying and men dying, nobody's worried about cavities. Ben volunteered for a different job. On June 27, 1944, 12 days into the battle, the 2nd Battalion surgeon was hit by a mortar fragment. Badly wounded. They needed a replacement immediately. "I'll do it," Ben said. The battalion commander looked at him. "You're a dentist, Captain." "I'm a soldier first," Ben replied. and they need a surgeon more than they need someone to pull teeth. So Captain Ben Salomon became the 2nd Battalion's forward aid station surgeon. Which meant one thing: he'd be right behind the front lines, treating casualties under fire. It's what he wanted. By early July 1944, American forces had pushed inland. They controlled most of Saipan, compressing the remaining Japanese forces into the northern tip of the island near Tanapag. But the Japanese weren't defeated, just cornered. Intelligence reports started coming in on July 6th. Radio intercepts, scout observations. Something big was coming. The Japanese were massing forces for a final attack, what they called a gyokusai, meaning shattering the jewel. A suicide charge. All or nothing. Death before dishonor. The estimates were terrifying. Between 3,000 and 5,000 Japanese soldiers preparing to attack at dawn. It would be the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. The 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, was positioned along the western coast. They dug foxholes, set up defensive positions, machine gun nests covering the approaches, artillery coordinates plotted. Everyone knew what was coming. Captain Ben Salomon set up his aid station in a small tent about 50 yards behind the front line foxholes. Close enough to get wounded men quickly. Far enough back to, theoretically, be protected. 30 yards from the beach. 100 yards from hell. All night the men waited. Some wrote letters they'd never send. Some prayed. Some just stared into the darkness, gripping their rifles, waiting for the screaming to start. At 04:45 hours, July 7th, 1944, it began. Not with screaming. With silence. The Japanese artillery had stopped. The jungle went quiet. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Then, from the darkness, a sound. Faint at first, growing louder. Banzai! 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 3,000 voices screaming as one. The wave hit at 0500 hours exactly. Chapter 3. The hospital becomes a battlefield. The Japanese assault was overwhelming, coordinated, savage. They attacked in waves, soldiers armed with rifles, grenades, swords. Behind them, Type 97 tanks crashed through the defensive line. Flame and steel and screaming death. The 105th Infantry fought desperately. Rifles cracking, machine guns hammering, artillery shells impacting in the enemy ranks, ripping holes that immediately filled with more attackers. But there were too many. Within minutes, the perimeter began to collapse. Japanese soldiers broke through the foxhole line. Then they were among the Americans, hand-to-hand fighting, bayonets, grenades exploding at arm's length. And the wounded. God, the wounded. They started flooding into Ben Salomon's aid station. Walking wounded, carried wounded, dragged wounded. Men with chunks blown out of them. Men missing limbs. Men dying. The small tent filled fast. 20 wounded, 25, 30. Captain Salomon moved between them, working with desperate efficiency. Tourniquets, pressure bandages, morphine. Triage decisions no human should have to make. Who can be saved? Who can't? Who needs help first? Blood soaked the ground. The tent reeked of it. And still they came. Then, through the chaos and screaming, Ben Salomon saw movement at the tent entrance. A Japanese soldier. Rifle with fixed bayonet. And he was bayoneting one of Ben's patients. A wounded American soldier. Helpless, lying on a stretcher. Everything stopped. Chapter 4. The Choice. Time does strange things in moments like these. Some say it slows down. Some say it speeds up. For Captain Ben Salomon, watching that enemy soldier murder one of his patients, time crystallized into perfect clarity. He was a dentist, a healer, a non-combatant protected by the Geneva Convention. By every rule of war, he was forbidden from taking up arms. But that soldier was killing his patient. The rulebook didn't seem very relevant anymore. Ben Salomon moved. He didn't grab a weapon, not yet. He fired from a squatting position with a .45 caliber pistol that was nearby. One shot. The Japanese soldier dropped. Ben turned back to the wounded, hands already moving to the next patient, checking vitals, applying pressure. 2 more Japanese soldiers appeared at the tent entrance. Ben shot them both. Then 4 more crawled under the tent walls. 4 simultaneous threats. What happened next would later be pieced together from eyewitness accounts of the few Americans who survived. Captain Ben Salomon rushed them. He kicked the knife out of one soldier's hand, shot a second, bayoneted a third. The 4th he headbutted in the stomach. Then a wounded American nearby shot that soldier dead. 7 enemy soldiers, dead, in less than 2 minutes. Ben Salomon looked around his aid station, at the 30 wounded men who couldn't move, couldn't fight, couldn't survive without help. Then he looked outside, where the Japanese were overrunning everything. He made his choice. "Get out," he told the wounded men who could still move. "Crawl if you have to. Get back to the regimental aid station. I'll cover you." "Sir, you can't." "That's an order." Captain Ben Salomon grabbed a rifle from a wounded soldier, and he walked out of that tent into hell itself. Outside, the situation was apocalyptic. The entire American defensive line had collapsed. Japanese soldiers were everywhere, shooting wounded in their foxholes, bayoneting survivors, pushing toward the beach. The few remaining American defenders were fighting desperately, but they were being overwhelmed. And behind them, 30 wounded American soldiers were trying to escape from the aid station. 30 men, crawling, limping, dragging themselves, completely exposed. Ben Salomon saw a machine gun position about 15 yards from the aid station. 4 American soldiers were slumped dead around it, killed trying to hold the line. The M1917A1 Browning machine gun was still there, still loaded. Ben ran to it, grabbed the handles, spun it toward the advancing Japanese forces, and opened fire. The gun shook in his hands. Brass casings ejected in a golden stream. Tracer rounds cut luminous paths through the dawn darkness. Japanese soldiers fell. Then more. Then more. But they kept coming. Think about what Ben Salomon was facing. Not 20 soldiers, not 50. Hundreds, possibly thousands, pushing through the American lines like a human tsunami. And he was one man, with one gun. The machine gun barrel began to glow, orange, then red. The heat was intense, enough to burn skin if you touched it. Ben kept firing. A bullet hit him, left shoulder. The impact spun him sideways, but he caught himself. Gritted his teeth, kept firing. Another bullet, right leg. He stumbled but didn't fall. The wounded Americans behind him were getting away. Crawling through the darkness, disappearing toward safety. Just a little longer, just a few more seconds. More bullets hit him, chest, abdomen. Each impact like being kicked by a horse. Ben Salomon's vision started to narrow, grey creeping in from the edges. But his hands stayed on that machine gun. Here's something most people don't understand about combat. Heroes don't think about being heroes. In that moment, Ben Salomon wasn't thinking about medals or glory or how history would remember him. He was thinking about the kid from Brooklyn with the stomach wound who needed to get home to his mother. The farm boy from Iowa who'd lost his leg but still had a life ahead of him. The sergeant from Texas with 3 daughters who'd never see their daddy again if Ben didn't buy them time. Every bullet he fired was a second. Every enemy soldier he dropped was a few more yards of distance for the wounded. The mathematics of sacrifice. The Japanese changed tactics. They stopped charging directly at the machine gun. Too many were dying. Instead, they began to flank, moving through the jungle, circling around. Ben saw them, adjusted fire, swung the machine gun in wide arcs, covering multiple approaches. But he was slowing down. Blood loss, shock. The wounds were adding up. A Japanese soldier got close, 20 yards, threw a grenade. The explosion rocked Ben backward. Shrapnel peppered his side. He stayed at the gun. 15 yards, 10 yards. Ben traversed the machine gun, fired. The attacker went down, but there were more, always more. His left arm stopped working. Bullet had severed something. He couldn't feel his hand anymore. He fired one-handed, right hand on the trigger, bracing against his body for stability. The sun was rising now, first light painting the battlefield in shades of red and gold. Ben Salomon looked back toward the aid station one more time. Empty. They'd made it. The wounded were gone. He'd done it. He'd bought them enough time. But the Japanese were still coming, still attacking. And Ben Salomon realized with crystal clarity, he wasn't walking away from this machine gun. This is where it ended. So he made one final decision. If he was going to die here, and he was, he'd take as many of them with him as possible. Every soldier he killed was one less hunting down his wounded, one less attacking another American position. He'd be the cork in the bottle, the wall they couldn't get past. Captain Ben Salomon settled behind that machine gun for the last time, and he went to work. The next hour is reconstructed from Japanese survivors and American troops who recaptured the position days later. The accounts are almost mythical in their brutality. Ben Salomon didn't just hold that position, he dominated it. Japanese soldiers would charge, fall, charge again, fall again. They tried flanking. He'd pivot the gun and cut them down. They tried rushing during reloads. He'd grab a rifle from a dead American and shoot them at point-blank range. They tried grenades. He'd drag the machine gun to a different position. Even wounded, even dying, he kept moving, kept adjusting, kept firing. Some reports say he moved that machine gun 3 different times to get better fields of fire. 3 times, while bleeding from multiple wounds, while missing the use of one arm, while his life drained out in dark pools on the volcanic soil. The Japanese couldn't understand it. One man, one machine gun. Why wouldn't he die? They shot him, again and again. He kept firing. They tried bayonet charges. He'd switch to his pistol and drop them before they reached the gun. 76 wounds. That's how many they'd count later. 76 separate bullet and bayonet wounds on Captain Ben Salomon's body. 24 of those wounds were inflicted while he was still alive, still conscious, still fighting. How do forensic investigators know? Tissue damage patterns, blood flow. The science of trauma tells the story. This wound was alive when he received it. This one. This one. He'd been shot in the chest, the abdomen, the legs, the face. And he kept firing. Eventually, maybe an hour after he first sat behind that gun, maybe more, his body simply couldn't continue. Blood loss, shock, massive trauma. But even at the end, his hands stayed on that machine gun. Japanese soldiers finally overwhelmed the position. They bayoneted him repeatedly, emptied rifle magazines into his body. When they moved on to attack other American positions, they left behind Captain Ben Salomon's body, still gripping the machine gun, still facing the enemy. And surrounding him, in a circle like some grotesque offering, lay the bodies of 98 Japanese soldiers. 98 confirmed kills. From one man. One dentist from Milwaukee who wasn't supposed to be fighting at all. The Battle of Saipan continued for another 16 days after Ben Salaman's death. When it finally ended on July 9, 1944, American casualties totaled over 16,000, with more than 3,000 killed in action. The 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, the unit Ben died protecting, suffered an 83% casualty rate. 8 out of every 10 men killed or wounded. But remember those 30 wounded soldiers in Ben's aid station? The ones he ordered to evacuate while he covered their withdrawal. They made it back to friendly lines. Most of them survived the war, went home, had families, lived lives. Because one dentist from Milwaukee decided their lives were worth more than his own. On July 10th, American forces recaptured the area where Ben Salaman made his last stand. Captain Edmund G. Love, the 27th Division historian, was part of the recovery team. When they found Ben's body, still slumped over that machine gun, Love actually counted the enemy dead. 98 bodies in front of Ben's position. Love immediately began gathering eyewitness accounts, survivor testimonies, evidence. He prepared a Medal of Honor recommendation and submitted it to Brigadier General Ogden J. Ross. The recommendation was forwarded to Major General George W. Greiner, Commanding General of the 27th Division. Greiner rejected it. His reason? Captain Salaman was in the medical service and wore a Red Cross brassard upon his arm. Under the rules of the Geneva Convention, to which the United States subscribes, no medical officer can bear arms against the enemy. The fact that enemy soldiers had been murdering Ben's patients in direct violation of that same Geneva Convention apparently didn't matter. The Medal of Honor recommendation was filed away, forgotten. Ben Salaman was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. No Medal of Honor, no recognition, just another casualty in a war filled with them. For most men, that would be the end of the story. But Captain Edmund Love didn't forget. In 1951, he resubmitted the Medal of Honor recommendation through the Office of the Chief of Military History. Rejected again. Different reason this time. The time limit for submitting World War II awards had passed. Just paperwork. Just procedure. In 1969, 25 years after Ben Salaman died, Lieutenant General Hal B. Jennings, the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army, tried again. That recommendation reached Stanley R. Resor, Secretary of the Army, who approved it and forwarded it to the Secretary of Defense. Returned without action. It took 58 years. 3 generations. Countless rejected recommendations. Finally, in 1998, Dr. Robert West from USC Dental School, the school Ben had graduated from in 1937, submitted a new Medal of Honor recommendation through Congressman Brad Sherman. This time, they had Major General Patrick D. Scully, Chief of the Army Dental Corps, supporting it. This time, something changed. Maybe it was the end of the Cold War, creating space to revisit World War II recognition. Maybe it was a new generation of military leadership willing to challenge outdated interpretations of the Geneva Convention. Maybe it was just that 58 years was long enough to wait for justice. On May 1, 2002, President George W. Bush stood in the White House and presented Ben Salaman's Medal of Honor to Dr. Robert West, who accepted it on behalf of USC Dental School. Ben Salaman became only the 3rd dental officer in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. One of only 3 Jewish Americans to receive it for World War II service. And one of the few Medal of Honor recipients to kill nearly 100 enemy soldiers in a single action. His citation reads, in part, "Captain Salaman's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army." Today, Ben Salaman's Medal of Honor is displayed at the Army Medical Department Museum in San Antonio, Texas. A replica sits at USC Dental School, where students preparing to heal are reminded that sometimes the greatest act of mercy is standing between evil and those who can't defend themselves. But here's what really matters about Ben Salaman's story. He wasn't supposed to be a warrior. He was supposed to fix teeth, to heal, not harm. His entire professional life had been dedicated to making people's lives better, one patient at a time. But when the moment came, when wounded American soldiers were being murdered in their hospital beds, Ben Salaman made a choice. Not because he wanted to kill, but because he refused to let his patients die. That's the difference between violence and defense, between murder and mercy. Ben Salaman didn't seek out that battle. He didn't volunteer to fight because he loved killing. He fought because wounded men who trusted him for protection were being slaughtered, and he had the skills to stop it. And he did, at the cost of everything.
There's a question that historians and military ethicists still debate about Ben Salaman. Did he violate the Geneva Convention? The technical answer is yes. Medical officers aren't supposed to use crew-served weapons like machine guns. But here's the more important question. Was he right? When enemy soldiers are murdering wounded men in a hospital tent, does the rulebook still apply? When the only thing standing between helpless wounded and violent death is one man with a machine gun, what's the moral choice? Ben Salaman answered that question with his life. He knew the rules. He'd been trained on the Geneva Convention. He understood that picking up that machine gun could cost him any chance at recognition or honor. And he did it anyway. Because some things matter more than rules. Some things matter more than careers or medals or even life itself. Sometimes doing the right thing means becoming something you never wanted to be. Sometimes mercy wears the face of violence. Ben Salaman was a dentist, an Eagle Scout, a good man who believed in healing. But for one terrible hour on a July morning in 1944, he became a wall. A wall of lead and fire and stubborn refusal to let evil pass. 98 enemy soldiers learned that walls don't break easily. And 30 American soldiers went home because one man decided their lives were worth his own. That's not just heroism. That's something deeper, something primal. That's love. The kind that lays down its life for friends. Captain Benjamin Lewis Salaman, Eagle Scout, dentist, soldier, hero. We'll never forget. Next time on WW2 Inside Records, we'll tell you about the B-17 pilot who flew his crippled bomber back from Germany with half the plane missing and saved every man aboard. Subscribe so you don't miss it.